Hey folks, this is Fernando doing another video for More Survivalist, and in this video I'm going to be talking about Spain as a potential country to relocate to. In one of my previous videos about leaving the United States, if it ever comes down to that, someone brought up Spain and asked about Spain as a good choice. Spain has a few good things going for it, some key aspects actually in which it does very well. First of all, it's one of the most affordable countries in Western Europe. You have some affordable countries in Eastern Europe as well, but Czech Republic, Slovakia, those are pretty much affordable, but it's much more of a cultural shock and doesn't score as well in other areas. Now, in terms of Western Europe, Spain is one of the cheapest options you have. I think that Portugal is even cheaper, but Spain is affordable enough. It's not as cheap as US, especially in some of the more affordable states and not the larger cities. But in terms of European standards, Spain does nicely. It's an interesting option as well because it wouldn't be as much of a cultural shock as you may think. Of course, Spanish would help a lot, would go a long way. But even if you're not very fluent in Spanish, you're very likely to find an English-speaking expat community in Spain of some kind. It's a popular option for British people that want to retire to a warmer climate country, which brings us to another good point, which is weather. Spain has some of the best weather you could hope for. It's very sunny, warm weather, and if cloudy and rainy days get you down, depress you and such, and weather is important for you, Spain definitely scores high in that area. Warm weather, sunny days, it's a good climate all around. Then you have what is maybe one of the best healthcare systems in the European Union. If you have a European citizenship, you can get free medical care in Spain, and we're talking about some of the best medical care in the world for free. That is as long as you are European. But even if you're not and you decide to retire to Spain and you don't have citizenship, for a reasonable price you can buy yourself a private medical care that scores very, very well in international standards. Often brought up the matter of Central and South America as countries where healthcare is affordable and of good quality. That's true to some extent. It's true that in terms, for example, of plastic surgery, Central and South America, you have good doctors that are good at that, are good at plastic surgery, and it's not expensive. Those are good bargains in that regard. It's also true that you have good customer care, so as to put it some way, in Central and South America. You have, you're going to be getting a nice room with good care. You're going to be having a polite nurse looking after you and such. Now, if we're talking about quality and technologically advanced medical care, you will not be finding the latest and best in Latin America, generally speaking. And this is coming from me of an experience of lots of years living in Argentina with what is arguably one of the best private medical cares plans that you could buy. I had one of those, and as good as it was, it's not top-notch, state-of-the-art technology in terms of medical care. You have, it's nice that you have your chart and you can pretty much pick any doctor you want. You can get as much visits as you want and such, and you have more control of it, but it's not as advanced, it's not as the latest best there is. For that, having both options, I would definitely go for a free medical care in Spain rather than relying on the private, the high-end private plan in South America. It will do well in those areas, in the customer care, in plastic surgery. It's very common as a bargain. That's true, but not the best. And if I had something, or one of my kids had something that required better, more specific, more advanced care, definitely I'd be looking towards Europe rather than Latin America. So those are a few things to keep in mind. Those are pretty high. Those are pretty important points. We're talking about affordability, good cost of living. We're talking about great weather and excellent medical care. So those are pretty important. Now, why not Spain? Or at least why I don't choose it myself? In spite of being, I have the Spanish citizenship. I'm from Spain, basically. My family, my grandparents, my parents are from Spain. So it's something that would be an obvious choice for myself. Why not Spain? So let's talk a little bit about the negatives of Spain. First of all, you have to keep in mind the language. And this may be ironic for some of you guys in US that may be complaining a little bit about all these foreigners in your country and all the Latins and Spanish-speaking community in your country. In Spain, in actually many cities of Spain, they don't speak Spanish. All right, that's a little bit of a shock for some people that didn't know that. Actually, some of the more well-known cities like Barcelona, they don't speak Spanish in Barcelona. And pretty much in the last few years, it's slowly getting banned to some extent. Officially or unofficially speaking, that's what's happening. It's not being taught in schools. People don't talk it among themselves. If you drop there and you start speaking Spanish, you will be getting replies. But as years go by, people speak worse and worse Spanish because it's the official stance of these places not to speak in Spanish. They speak, for example, in Barcelona, they speak Catalan. Catalan is like a dialect of Spanish with a little bit of French and their own thing going on there. People are very sensitive about these things. They're very, very much into their own thing. And this is something that I have addressed in the past. Actually, I got an email of someone in Barcelona very angry and complaining that I was ignorant about their bilingual status and that they're both fluent in Catalan and in Spanish. Truth be told, they may be fluent in Catalan. I don't care much, but they're definitely not fluent in Spanish. And this person that was complaining and angry with me about me saying that they're not good in Spanish, he sent me an email in Spanish, maybe 20 lines. Over half of them were grammatical horrors. So poorly written. It was, it was a little bit depressing. It was, pretty sad to see an adult write at that level. I mean, not even a child writes so poorly. It was pretty shameful. But that's the perfect example of what ends up happening in these places. And this is not just in Barcelona. In Galicia, they speak Gallego, which again, not Spanish. Gallego, different, and even though it may be a little bit similar, and if you drop by in Barcelona, you're going to be understanding 90% of what they're saying if you speak Spanish. But because it's not the official language, Spanish not being the official language, and they have like 1 hour in schools, kids are always the ones that get the worst out of this, because in schools they only have 1 hour worth of Spanish a week in most schools, unless you're paying for an exclusive private school of some kind. It's 1 hour of Spanish a week. As you can imagine, with 1 hour of any language a week, you don't dominate it, you don't speak it fluently, you don't even know it, to be honest. You maybe know how to ask for how to say your name. My name is something, and ask for a glass of water, and that's that. So they end up growing up not knowing Spanish. And this is, at least for someone with kids, this is a very serious handicap. I mean, you're talking about a child that's going to be being brought up in a place where the language he's going to be using is not English, not Spanish, not not French, not German, not a language that it's spoken at least in an entire country or has somewhat of a international recognition of some sort. All right, you're talking about a dialect that is limited to a couple cities, a very small area, and that bullshit about being bilingual. You're not bilingual if you're studying a language an hour a week, like it happens in most of these schools. You don't use it. And again, when you talk with people in these places, immediately you see how many errors they make when speaking, when writing. They just don't have a good grasp of it. And on a professional level, when you're in a job, when you're working, you need to have a certain level of proficiency in that language if you're expected to be competent in any way. If you cannot communicate properly, and if you write emails that are a disgrace and embarrassing, then you're not good at it. I mean, that's a huge handicap. I see that as a big problem. Having kids, I see that as a big issue. Maybe for people that are retired, maybe for young couples that are looking to experiment life in other countries and such, that wouldn't be an issue. That wouldn't be a problem. But for someone that has children, it certainly is. Besides that, we have the issue in Spain of how the society is in general. And that's another problem that I see, especially for someone, again, with kids, which is my case. Someone with kids being brought up in Spain, you're going to be in a culture that is, we've talked before about the difference between European cultures and the American way of viewing things. Not only Americas in the United States, but the Americas in the continent, Latins, North Americans in general, they have a way of viewing certain things in life, a little bit more of a appreciation for personal liberties, for independence, that is not as common in our parts of the world, and definitely not in Europe. Again, guys, I'm talking about in general. People, individuals, everyone is different. I'm talking about in general, as in a majority percentage of people being a certain way or another. In general, you will see that in Spain, it's tending a lot towards this extreme liberal view of things. What do I mean by that? I could give you a few examples to illustrate this a little bit better. A few years ago, when visiting in Spain, I was looking for a gun shop to ask a few questions, and it's not always about guns. It seems that everything that I talk about is guns. I like guns. I enjoy shooting a lot and such. It's just an example of how people are. So I was looking for a gun shop in Spain, and I found a knife shop in Spain. Knives are very much a Spanish thing. At least they used to be. They still are. There's quite a bit of a strong knife enthusiast, knife community in Spain. There's plenty of good knives still being made in Spain. There was definitely a culture around knives in Spain. A tradition of building great knives, good steel. At least it used to be. It's not as important as it used to be, but it's still there, and you will definitely find a community. Even guys that are into preparedness, outdoor survival stuff, you will find that in Spain, at least to a small degree. But I found this store that was selling knives mostly, and a little bit of airsoft guns. It also had a little bit of those fantasy type of knives. You know what I'm talking about? Those that look like horror movie knives, with wicked looking curved blades with spikes in the knuckles, and that usually it's crap. It's not good quality, but lots of those fantasy knives of awful steel. That kind of thing that generally made in China, cheaper stuff, but with a certain, clearly with a certain horror movie aesthetics around it. A little bit of leather stuff with metal studs and spikes, and that kind of dark clothing. So I walk inside the store. At least it was a nice store. It was kind of my thing. And the clerk there, the guy at the counter, was, again, a guy all dressed in black, wearing leather with spikes and weird stuff. I think he even had like a bit of piercing going on there. So we start talking, and I end up asking about if he knew where I could find a gun store nearby, and he said no. And I asked him about the guns in display. I obviously knew those were airsoft guns, and some even toys. But I asked nonetheless. You don't actually have any real guns here, no? It's not an actual gun store, just in case. And he said no, this is all like airsoft and such. And he said, yeah, because we don't sell guns like in America. We're not cowboys crazy about guns. I mean, if we were that way, we would be shooting each other all day long. And we're not crazy like that. And I couldn't help thinking, what a judgmental thing to say. I mean, you're not exactly the role model that most people would want. So you're kind of a freak yourself. So why judge others that way? But definitely a little bit of that. Even, I thought it was funny because a guy that certainly had this dark, goth, emo, whatever you want to call it, thing about him, which it's not my cup of tea, so as to put it some way. He thought that Americans were freaks because they like guns. I know lots of people that like guns that are much more normal than what this guy obviously was. And he had a store full of knives and things that looked like guns at the very least. But he was still judgmental enough so as to consider Americans to be nuts because they are cowboys and they like guns. It's a cultural thing. It would happen, for example, that my parents being in Spain, they would bring like presents while I was living in Argentina, and lots of times bringing clothes. And most of the time, I would just have to say, I cannot wear this here. Why not? Well, because most of the clothes, the way people dress in Spain, it's this like fruity colored, pink, bright yellow, bright orange, metrosexual crap that you would be laughed at in South America, even in North America, in US, you would be laughed at, or at least it would be very clear, it would be very noticeable. Even worse in Latin America, with a little bit more of a less tolerant in that aspect, in that way. I mean, to be honest, you cannot just walk around in the average suburb of Argentina dressed like that, because at the least you'll be laughed at and pointed at, if not beating the crap out of, or mugged just for looking like a little bit less masculine that is the social acceptable standard, so to speak, in Latin America. Just trying to put it in some way. It's that thing about, I don't know what it is. They just dress in a certain way. Guys almost dressing like women, women almost dressing like guys. All that, like male and female being mixed up in this mess that, at least to someone like myself of coming from a Latin background, and even compared to what you see in the United States, it is weird and it's not what you're used to. That's definitely something that that you at least notice. And then there's more stuff than just that. It's not just guns, it's not just knives, it's not just the way people dress. These are all little parts of a total, of a way the society is. More serious stuff would be, for example, the way they handle education and the way they handle issues with kids. One of the things that I write in my book that's coming up soon, Bugging Out and Relocating, is that when you're considering a country as a potential country to bug out to eventually, if you ever have to, or a country to relocate to, if you're thinking about doing that, is that you have to do your homework. You have to research that country as well as you can. I'm talking about researching the history of that country, because that's a pretty important part of what that country is as of right now, as of today. If you know its history, you will have more information and you will know why things are the way they are. But not only that, also learning about current history. learning about the ongoing news in that country. So I would be in Argentina, considering my options, and of course one of those options clearly was Spain, and I would just read the news of what was happening in Spain. And one day I found this article about people complaining, parents complaining about sex education, the way it was being handled in Spain. I already had an idea of, you know, that's this extreme liberal crap that you have in Spain, all over Europe, to be honest, but especially in Spain, you see it being even worse, it seems. And parents were angry about the way sexual education was being handled. They were giving, you know, information to kids that, you know, even if you try to be open-minded about this stuff, I try to be very open-minded about all this. And, you know, if you're giving sexual education to 9-10-year-olds, all right, what is it exactly that they were giving these kids in Spain? Well, they were giving, as part of their sexual education, they were giving kids, 9-10-year-old kids, they were giving them pornographic comic books. You know, comic books like with drawings. And I, you know, went up and looked it up to see what it was actually about. And man, I mean, that was fucked up. There's no way, no matter how liberal you want to put it, this was a comic book written by a complete pervert. It wasn't only pornographic. We're talking about human-animal sex. We're talking about adult children sex, stuff that is illegal in most of the civilized world. And this was in a comic book that was being handled over to children in schools in Spain. I mean, the person that wrote this should be in jail by any reasonable standards, but instead he was writing what the Department of Education of Spain considered to be appropriate for children. Not only that, they were giving 9-10-year-olds sex toys. I mean, you clearly see that, you know, you have this a little bit to some extent in most European countries, but some are worse than others. Spain is definitely in that point where, trying to be so open-minded, they opened so much their heads that their brains fell off and it got full of crap. That's the way I see it myself. I mean, if you see it different, if that's the kind of thing that appeals to you and that's the kind of way you want your kids to be brought up, then definitely consider Spain, because they're all for that. For, as I usually put it, for like-minded people, and you kind of have an idea of what that means if you've been following this channel for some time, a little bit more conservative, a little bit more, I'd like to think, reasonable, then that's not the kind of thing that you want for your kids. Definitely not. So even if your job as a parent is to educate your kids yourself, you don't get away with out of that. You still have to do that. The family is the brick that's going to be building what a child is going to be becoming in the future as an adult. Even if you are responsible about that, society is going to be influencing your kid as well to a lesser or greater degree. I'm not one of those guys that believes in, you know, living in a cave, isolated from everything, and I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's reasonable. I don't think that actually works. I think that even though you're responsible for most of what your child ends up being as an adult, the influence of the society around it is gonna be there. How good it is or how bad it is, it's gonna be depending on what's around you. If the society around your kid is this stuff that I'm talking about here, I don't like it much. I don't like it at all. So that's one of the main reasons why we didn't end up going for Spain. All those things end up showing a picture of how things are that I just don't like it, and I don't like it for my kids. Along with the language was clearly something that, you know, maybe if I didn't have kids and I was just only concerned about cost of living, climate, hanging on the beach, you know, and good medical care, all those things you will be finding in Spain. I don't think it's the best place to bring up a kid, at least the way I want it for my own kids. Folks, that's basically it. Just my take on it. Yours may be completely different, and I accept that as well. Folks, remember to subscribe. Take care. Thumbs up if you like the video. Take care. See you on our next video.